and this video will be about the Birthing Billboard, the Hebrew Birthing Billboard. Yes. And here we'll see an in-depth investigation to the most unusual way of cataloging a woman's coming of age in the wilderness of the Exodus. And this is an article written about historical women, inscribed by heroic women, recounting their massive journey, recounting their desperate begetting in a dry and dusty land. And this is dedicated to my lifetime partner and co-traveler to that dry and dusty land, Paula. So here we see the Hebrew Birthing Billboard. Yes, most definitely a billboard. Most definitely not a Stella. Not a Stella! You can see how enormous it is. Thank you, Andrew, for that photo and the previous one from Steve Parks, who's perhaps climbed Mount Sinai more than anyone. It was an honor to climb with him once. And most definitely a birthing billboard by those that were definitely pro-life. A billboard only recently discovered and only now being translated by, your friendly neighborhood analyst. That is, if your neighborhood is Canada. A big and boastful billboard where postpartum women would post their long-awaited birth notices. A posting that was all the rage back in the age where Facebook and Twitter posts were but a twinkle in a young man's eye. A bronze twinkle at that. And most definitely written by Hebrew women. No doubt about that either, as you'll see. Since men don't boast about those sorts of things, they boast about other things. And a Hebrew birthing billboard as opposed to this Egyptian birthing billboard. Thank you, Carol Rees, for that. A billboard created in Kamambo, Egypt, just a little south of Luxor. Created in what they called Upper Egypt for some odd reason. Sort of like Toronto is alleged to be Upper Canada. Doesn't make much sense. No, it doesn't. An Egyptian billboard created a few centuries either way of the Common Era, which means either way of BC or AD for you secularists. You know, your common ambiguity. A much later billboard that was likely not written by women, much too methodical for that, and much too literate for that. A billboard created in an age when Egyptian hieroglyphics were in their final days. At an age when no one else would adopt them, since the number of figures had now become utterly exhaustive and exhausting, much like the labor portrayed above. Labor? Huh? Female figures which included various instruments of obstetrics now. Perhaps a massive medical clinic in Kamambo advertising their high-tech wares, displaying their weapons of mass obstetrics, with flattering figures of their Egyptian customers, with their seated customers being pampered with piping hot coffee, Arabic coffee, no doubt. Nice, huh? However, can you spot our less pampered subjects in our earlier billboard? Can you identify our Hebrew subjects that are also sitting pretty? Can you? Or do you need a little magnification on that Hebrew billboard? There you go. Magnified for you. Okay. As you can see, our Hebrew maidens are also sitting pretty, and no, the above are not aid maidens milking, and no, there is no espresso here. Instead, they are expressing something else, a little less modestly. And hopefully you can see that the sitting position of our Hebrews is a little more elevated than those more sedentary Egyptians, not near as relaxed as our Egyptians are. No, not near as relaxed. They seem a little stressed. As you may have noticed that our Hebrew billboard is considerably cruder as well, and not just because it was inscribed more than a millennium earlier, but because it was done with cruder tools on a much harder rock and also done in great haste. So let's compare apples to apples then. Let's make a fair comparison, shall we? Let's compare those Hebrew images above to images within the very same era then. Within the very same decade even. Which is to say, let's compare that Hebrew inscription to an Egyptian relief that Wikipedia claims is from the very same time period. 1450. That's what it says. From a period that is generally referred to as the New Kingdom era, called an era in order to be safely ambiguous. Safely ambiguous, since most of these things simply cannot be dated any more accurately than that. Not with carbon dating technology, not from dendrochronology, not from ceramic typology, and not from our brave new archaeomagnetic dating either. No, the very best dating you might possibly get would be your celestial dating, such as the excellent stuff from Gerard Gerteau here. He has other issues too. But there is no celestial stuff going on in this Egyptian billboard, and I am not seeing any in our Hebrew billboard either. But to that unusually brave dating of Wikipedia, here is your more contemporary Egyptian billboard, your much earlier business shingle. There you go. How's that for a shingle? Like your barbershop pole, advertising their wares. A Mamisi shingle with a squatty potty image, promoting some very fine midwives for hire. An image that I captured at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Once again, an Egyptian mama giving birth on a birthing chair. A mama pampered by a couple of caring midwives when midwives were all the rage. A very flattering relief, very flattering, shown directly above a far less flattering inscription. An inscription that is far more graphic. And in our more graphic inscription, we see a mother caressing her uber big belly, with her child still in the placenta, just prior to the birthing chair. And surrounding this graphic inscription, we see the actual instruments of obstetrics. Bronze Age instruments, those earlier, cruder instruments. Cruder instruments, as opposed to the weighing scale, cupping glasses, probes, sound spatulas, shears, scissors, and gallipots, or incense burners, according to Carol Reeves of that earlier photo. You want a better picture of those dirty bronze birthing instruments? Here we go. Including a pretty serious knife, a knife that doubles as an axe head. How's that? With a couple of my friends over there at the Egyptian Museum. How's that for a picture? With the seminal point of my comparison being that those early Egyptian and Hebrew images are not terribly separated in time, only separated in space, with this brand new Hebrew space now being in Arabia. Saudi Arabia, to be exact. We have conclusively demonstrated that Exodus space earlier, demonstrated it in my petroglyph panel article. And we will demonstrate that space yet again in this Birthing Billboard article. Demonstrate it here in a multifaceted approach with multi-factor authentication. So get over it already, huh? You have already lost that geographic battle. Here's some background for you. Now, in our images to follow, our Hebrews are not using an upper-class birthing chair. No, not like the presumed goddess not above is using, assisted by her Hathor-like midwife goddesses. Nor are they using the uber-basic birthing bricks of the lower-class culture in order to separate their bum from the birth espresso, you might say. No, even those let go and let Hathor rule birthing bricks were far too civilized for our Hebrew women. They were far too passive and far too pagan for monotheistic Hebrews to use. Not to mention far too heavy to take along for their journey of a lifetime. No, they had more than enough stuff to carry along with them, like a tent and clothes and a cooking pot. Their beast of burden was loaded to the max. To that end, our Hebrews are being far more utilitarian, using the far more basic boulders of their present wilderness to do their leg presses against, accelerating the birthing process in that isometric way, for they had very little time to stop and rest. Very little time, since those Hebrews were to go exactly when and where the cloud by day told them to go, and even go swiftly at night. Go exactly when and where the pillar of fire was burning bright. Both you and your cattle were to settle up immediately and proceed in military formation, hanging on to the poopy tail of your beast, since that tail seemed to help a lot. Hanging on for the very long commute, with everyone stopping and starting their bovine chaperone at the very same time, lest you get stuck in stop-and-go traffic. And I'll show you how that's done in that earlier video of mine. And lest you get left behind, you must go at the very same time, lest you be left behind in the wilderness, to be raped and pillaged by those booty-loving Amalekites who were picking off those Hebrew stragglers just for fun. A rivalry between the not-so-identical twins Jacob and Esau. A long-held sibling rivalry. Yes, 12 displaced tribes versus 14 native chieftains. Go tribes, go. Picking off them off-base Jacobites all the way up to the wilderness of Sin. At which point those Hebrews were then permitted to travel in stages. Permitted to travel more discreetly, with the warrior contingent of Manasseh likely leading the way at this point, along with another warrior contingent holding up the rear. Traveling in stages as they now made their way to the area of Rephidim, in order to be tested yet again. A small excursion where those off-base Jacobites finally had it out with those sore loser Amalekites, when that Manasseh warrior contingent had a full-day battle against the bigger and badder weapons of their second cousins twice removed, or something like that. Against those nasty weapons that simulated a sword. Swords that remain to be found yet. But I expect they will be. Swords which were more akin to knives or axes, as seen above, according to present-day archaeology. No, not your standard Lord of the Rings sword. Those are for later giants and goblins. And the technology, well, it just wasn't there quite yet. So, dirty bronze swords fashioned from the nearby copper and tin mines of the Negev region. Yes, the Negev region. A tin innovation that superseded the earlier copper and arsenic combo, but still a down and dirty combo. And yet, quite a protracted battle, since it seems highly unlikely that the Egyptians would have given their Hebrew slaves any weapons whatsoever for that originally proposed short-term pilgrimage, especially since the Egyptians were greatly outnumbered at the time. And especially since those Hebrews had likely made more than a few enemies over those centuries of slavery. Not only that, but it's highly unlikely that some Egyptian bronze sword would have washed ashore for them either. For them Hebrews, when the Red Sea returned to normal. Well, wooden spears perhaps, but spears? They're not the weapon of choice on a chariot. And to that end, I cannot stress enough, dear reader, that the battle was not won by the Egyptian sword, but rather by the very arm of the Lord. Only this paradigm follows the biblical pattern. Only this follows the petitioning pattern of Moses, raising his arms to the Lord for help. But you really don't want to know about all that fighting stuff now, do you? You really only want some better pictures of those Hebrews giving birth, huh? of those women doing their gluteal isometrics, of those women doing their aggressive leg presses, right? Of them actually using a boulder as a backboard in the birthing process to graphically validate my incredibly wild thesis, right? Okay. Don't get queasy on me now. And don't say I didn't warn you. Okay. Oh, another one on that birthing billboard. Oh, yeah. Okay, here's a boulder nearby. Oh, is that graphic enough for you? Oh. And there's a similar graphic for you. Well. And these are kind of graphic as well. Definitely women. Thank you very much. Graphic enough for you? You still okay, dear reader? Huh? Now, if one of you keeners happen to develop the spiritual will, you may even find some Hebrew DNA that was left there, buried in one of those galley pots or medicine bottles. Go for it. DNA lasts an awful long time, you know. And that DNA might even be your smoking gun Hebrew proof. Far better than using those ambiguous chariot wheels as proof, or Egyptian swords as proof. That could be some other war for all we know. But as regards our pictographic smoking room billboard, well, some of you insufferable skeptics may still insist that the above images are Arabic instead. Well, I'm going to disabuse you of that. Are you kidding me? That many images in that little time? It ain't happening. Just what kind of savage do you think those Arabs are anyways? Leaving their women in the wilderness to give birth? You just try telling that to their fuzzy faces, will you? And that debasing aside, there does appear to be a bit of modern-day Arabic on this billboard as well. A wee bit of modern-day cursive. Good old cursive. But let someone else puzzle the above inscription out. Someone like Jalad or McDonald from the now defunct Oceana website. Let them have some fun too. Okay, what else do we have on this billboard, you ask? What else? Maps. Maps with zigs and zags. Maps. Zigs and zag indicators. Maps capturing topographic details. Frame by frame. With the first frame above roughly representing their domicile in Egypt, with that zag on the right representing the foundational Nile. A map then moving eastwards toward the next topographical feature, right here. A semi-rough representation of the north-south Red Sea, or Gulf of Aqaba, you might say. A rough representation of what may be seen from a hilltop scouting site at the Nuweiba beachhead, right here. With the next frame in that sequence, right here, representing their passage southeast. Representing the recent journey northward up Highway 55, before there was a highway, of course, a passageway with mountains on either side. With the final frame representing their very latest excursion. That frame representing their latest excursion. Representing their passage southeast to an encampment with a southeast bearing. Southeast bearing. Southeast bearing. With this billboard being central to that encampment location at that southeast encampment. A billboard dead north of the rock that was split. A billboard several kilometers north of that battlefield. A billboard celebrating life in the midst of death. North of the Split Rock. A billboard conveying all the necessary information. Too much information, some might say. Conveying maps of where those births occurred at each stage of the journey. But perhaps the most fascinating map is a smaller one below, a much more meticulous map at the midpoint of the journey, at the 1 month mark of the journey. The midpoint of our billboard as well. A map of a location that was particularly memorable for at least one of those women, since it seems she came of age there with triplets. A map with a profound similarity to this modern-day Google Earth map. Note the highway there. Note the passageways there. Also here, and the further northward journey, which was frame 3 above. Just follow the 55 road, right, Dorothy? That's all you have to do. All the way to the wilderness of Oz. A birthing map that affirms that all the congregation of the sons of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. Elim and Sinai, way out there. It's right between. There you go. Between Elim and Sinai. Elim, which is presumed by some to be the later named Taib Alism of that Google Earth map. With the Arabic word Taib meaning having a semantic range of good, kind, nice, or delicious. Awfully flattering words for a desert up there. It's a desert there. However, a relatively delicious sort of an oasis, be with luscious grass and palm trees, dates and gourds and camel dung, right along with springs of water over there. Beautiful looking for a desert. However, still only about 70 palm trees. I didn't count them. At that Elim site, despite having that running source of potable water. I mean, it's potable. Didn't make me sick. Not like Egypt did. So it seems that oasis hasn't changed that much over all those years, nor has the place name changed all that much. That is, if you drop that delicious adjective and drop that strangely hissing sibilance. Then try comparing the word Elim to Elim, bearing in mind that there is no such letter as a short Arabic E. So, guess what letter the Arabs used instead of an E? With the wilderness of Sin being directly east of Elim. Well, directly east of the northern entrance to that vast wilderness, at any rate. A wilderness indicated by that vast emptiness on our Google map below. A vast emptiness underneath that Google terrain switch here. Empty, apart from some underground lake. Apparently. An emptiness that currently houses the town of Abad, whatever. An emptiness that is presently being turned into a massive water reservoir for an up-and-coming megacity far to the south. A megacity about 33 times bigger than New York City. A leading-edge city that is supposed to be ready by the end of this decade if everything goes as planned. But most likely called the Wilderness of Sin for a cartological reason. Cartological, not theological, for a relatively good mapping reason. With the root word sin having a pre-compass meaning, having a meaning of easterly, supposedly, as in the general direction of China, as the unadventurous Wikipedia says, possibly via Arabic. Arabic. Huh? Come on. So, but the general direction of east, right? As in Asian. Right? Sorry, folks. Like it or not, those are generally accepted name changes in the archaeological industry. With the more specific Mount Sinai being directly east of that wilderness of sin, as pointed out here. Which is to say, even more east of that easterly wilderness, hence the tagging of the indicative suffix onto sin, yielding Sinai. A directly east location indicated by that upper green patch on that Google map, which I showed you. A destination directly visible, as indicated in my photo below. Directly visible from that wilderness of sin. Here we have a photo taken from that entrance to that vast and vacuous wilderness of sin, which I took back in October. And where's Mount Sinai, you say? Right there. Directly visible. A wilderness where there was great complaint, and I don't blame them a bit. As you can see from our photo above, our Mount Sinai summit, just to the left of center, is directly to the east. It's only about 30 nautical kilometers away from our number 5 highway here. From our crossroad portions of those maps shown above. A crossroad that is clearly visible from that sacred summit. A crossroad just ahead of that humble sea. Where is that crossroad? Where's the sea? Here is Mount Sinai. Not quite the summit, just a little bit down from the summit. Looking westward to the Red Sea, Gulf of Aqaba, and the crossroad being over here. What a view. What a view. The photo that I took the year previous. A sea, Red Sea, Gulf of Aqaba, a sea that bowed before the cloud and raised no ire against the fire. Pardon the poetry. Yeah, that bowed before its sovereign creator and could hold no candle to that flame. And you can actually take that pivotal crossroad directly to the east, directly here, if you really wanted to. Yeah, it has just been paved. It's a road that's just been paved. But that would only get you to the west side of Mount Sinai, only get you to the frighteningly steep backside of that holy mountain. It's steep. It only gets you to a highly confined wilderness. You're surrounded. Only get you to a place where I suspect Moses took his sheep when they were desperate for fodder. A mountain that he was told he would return to later. Was told that mountainous destiny when he encountered that non-burning bush. Cool, huh? Yeah, cool. My buddy Andrew Jones having some fun. However, not all those Hebrews could fit very comfortably on that western side. Moses knew that, and the cloud certainly knew that. Not only that, but there is only one way out on that side, the very same way as in. You are trapped. Not good. Not good at all. Not against those unforgiving Amalekites. So, those Hebrews had to take the long way to that mountain in order to get to the eastern side instead, to get to the front side of that wilderness, to a much bigger wilderness, and a badder wilderness at that. And it would take them a full month to get there from here, to get there from that crossroad epiphany, to get there in various stages now, yet still following the course of the cloud, of course, just lagging a wee bit now, which would not necessarily be a direct course either. There would be piles of trials along the way, trials in order to build their faith, trials in order to separate the sheep from the goats, so to speak, to separate the man from the manna, so to speak. But continuing on with our biblical reference, we are told that those stiff-necked sons of Israel got to this in-between point exactly 1 month after leaving Egypt. They got to the smaller backside of that wilderness of sin on the 15th day of the following month, after having left on the 15th of the previous month. And when they got there, they grumbled against the Lord. Grumbled for food. Grumbled exceedingly. Which isn't exactly a sin. Just read the book of Job, for instance. Despite all of Job's grumbling, he did not sin, but still a serious attitude issue. But of course, you all know the rest of this Exodus story, right? You all know the biblical account of some amazing glory of the Lord then manifesting itself from that nebulous nimbus cloud, manifesting himself somewhere around that figurative crossroad, an epiphany somewhere around the time of Easter, when the weather was not so hot, when the good Lord appeared to a great many sons of Israel, somewhere around that modern-day Al-Bad of our Google map, of the good Lord appearing with a pretty wild prophecy to a pretty miserable people, some pretty wild prophecy about being the bread of life, so to speak. The account continues of how it then rained down quail that very evening. Yes, rained down birds live on Saturday night. Shabbat Night Live. Rained them down like missiles from pregnant Zeppelin. Oh, the humanity. And then it rained down manna the following morning. Rained down that what is it stuff. Just as that prophecy had foretold, bringing that bread-like sustenance to a great many people. But that is an inscription on another nearby artifact and another up-and-coming article. So hang in there for that missive. Yet this massive stone was merely to recall their birthing stories, to record their wilderness births, to record them in their respective locations in a world as best as they could remember it. This is the world as best as I can. However, I'd like to draw your attention to one other birthing story on that massive stone, massive boulder. A bovine birthing story this time. An acontextual story that got smuggled in somehow. Smuggled in by some illiterate muggle, no doubt. The birthing story of a calf with that vertical birthing stroke indicating its bovine birth somewhere around Al-Bad as well. An awfully big-headed calf that looks surprisingly like the golden calf idol that is about to be fashioned just a couple months later, looking surprisingly like these parallel pictographs soon to be found on the petroglyph panel, my earlier article, and the Mount Sinai panel. A rather innocuous-looking calf without horns or a penile sheath. A harmless-looking calf that was about to cause a great deal of grief a short time later. Grief for the righteous as well as for the largely unrighteous. A corporate culpability, with all the sons being forced to eat its glittering gilding. This is not an Easter bunny, folks. No, nothing that innocuous. But on a much lighter note, I'd also like to draw your attention to some other figures on our billboard as well. Figures such as which seem to parallel these figures, also found on the petroglyph panel. Wow, what's going on here? Figures which I speculated earlier are tribal autographs. Autographs of those august tribes of Jacob, which those women were so very tickled to augment now, to supplement in barely sustaining numbers, turning those procreating women into tribal heroes now. Yay! Hooray for supermoms. Let's get on to our translation. Now to the text. I'd like to draw your attention to some figures at the very, very top of this birthing stone. The figure is quite fittingly at the very crown of this billboard. Figures which highlight this entire theme and meme. Figures which indicate just who all those births ought to be accredited to. No, not to some tribal father or even some biological father, but rather to the Heavenly Father himself. Yes, to the Lord, of course, as is right and proper. Just as the primal Eve gave credit to the Lord for her blessed coming of age, for her being able to give birth to a man-child. She gave credit to the Lord. Y-H-W-H. And there's our byline. And to that very same credit, we also see that very same YHWH on our birthing billboard. A slightly modified YHWH here, but that is another glorious upcoming article for you. Oh, you're going to love it. A YHWH, which very, very closely parallels the top line of another inscription that I discovered nearby, a private and personal inscription, as opposed to the very public inscription compiled above, our earliest Yahweh on record. But you will have to go to my Paleo-Hebrew Eulogy article for that fantastic reveal. However, now you have a better idea, dear reader, that this was a great coming of age stone, a milestone, and eulogy of very great worth to mothers. A milestone in which they were to strictly record their births, record them in vivid pictograph format, as well as the more subdued formal format. To recap, in this birthing billboard, we see the formal theme being presented, right along with the cruder meme, with that meme being those unapologetic pictographs of women giving birth, whereas the theme is outlined with this lightly inscribed byline that I showed you above here. A theme outlined by those modest figures above, figures which are tightly integrated into the very top line, an economic integration that we have also seen elsewhere. A byline seamlessly integrated into the lightly inscribed Vav. A Vav that was later to become the ineffable name. A name presumably far too holy to say about a millennium later. But a birthing theme that gets repeated here numerous times on this billboard, repeated in the more formal format. So it's perfectly clear that many of those women could both read and write that birthing concept, that those women had at least some measure of literacy. Also clear that those women could remember those miserable birth locations most vividly, and they were not about to let their husbands forget it. A birthing motif that dynamically echoes that primal theme of Eve, a theme that echoes the very first mother's thankfulness, a eulogy, that echoes Eve's thankfulness to someone called El, a eulogy that repeatedly echoes that by El I have begotten a child by El. A transcendent El object followed by the delicate subject of begetting. A Yalad subject represented by that squatting female figure. A female figure that continues to be represented in our modern Hebrew, represented with that ancient Lamad figure. Do you see the similarity? That ancient squatting figure, or by this sanitized fat figure, if you don't mind baby fat. Fat, but also the tallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet, tallest by a long shot. Unlike the truncated Nun of the presumed Phoenician alphabet. Yeah, the academics are not quite sure about this one yet either. A letter later marked incorrect on that much later Zayat stone. Marked incorrect. A stone where the Lamad is not the tallest figure in the alphabet anymore. So I will have none of that presumed Punic nonsense, and neither should you be boondoggled by it. Since our byline word would make zero sense then in any known language. But to that recent language-affirming end, the highly esteemed Christopher Rolston is likely right with respect to his Benyah's translation being the old Hebrew language rather than the Phoenician Punic language, for deity reasons, of course. For the very good Yah reasons, which I have demonstrated in my Paleo-Hebrew Eulogy article, and for the very good Yah reasons that may also be demonstrated with our present Birthing Billboard. But that's another article. That being said, I would dispute Rolston's Benya translation. I would dispute his stuttering son of Yah translation, since the Ben element is frequently omitted in West Semitic seals of that period, according to Cross. And since the L prefix means lineage as well, so why double down on that so very vague lineage? It's madness. Let me read about it there. Instead, I submit that Rolston's N, his supposed N and L letters, should be interchanged in that Benya. Yes, since folks tend to mix them letters up a wee bit for some reason, especially if they're mixed up at the time, inebriated. A sensible interchange of these letters, which would yield a Nabalya instead, a name more applicable to the wine jug in which that name was found, with this wine being the god of fools. Well, let's not hit on him for a while. However, continuing on with our now well-attested Old Hebrew lamad, a lamad that continues to be used in the context of most certain begetting, a begetting which has far more meaning than some mere prepositional for, or than some mere prepositional belonging to context, as you'll see in that above article. A lamad used mostly in regard to the begetting of a cultured knowledge, according to HebrewForChristians.com. A bit of a prudish interpretation, I'd say. Or supposedly used more with respect to agnostic begetting, according to a mystical sort of begetting, another overrated begetting that belongs on Jeopardy. However, the origin of that letter was in all likelihood far more primal, and knowing in a far more intimate sense, in a far more physical sense, as in Adam knew Eve, knew her in a physical sense, knew her in this pictographic sense shown below. If you kids watching, blind their eyes. A pictograph likely inscribed by a woman, perhaps at that time of the month. And if you don't think that a lady can be that graphic, well, then you might just want to watch the YouTube video Born This Way by Lady Gaga. But I recommend that you don't. This pictograph should be more than sufficient. Here's the pictograph for you. Seen enough? With the woman being on top here, just to be a little bit descriptive. I've demonstrated several other gender distinctions elsewhere, and we won't go through them here. But as a bit of a heads up, dear reader, those are not the horns of a cow. Not the horns of a cow, as many like to characterize the aleph. No, that is hair in motion on a very hairy head. Whereas the supine character is wearing a scarf, protect him from the dust. That is not a hijab, folks. Plus, there are less graphic descriptions also inscribed near our birthing billboard. PG-13 depictions, just in case the above was a little too graphic for you. Short form depictions, abridged depictions on what appears to be a consummation stone. Yeah, a consummation stone. A stone signifying the marriage of several couples. Yes, different orthology for different folks. They didn't all have the same writing skills. Sort of like carving your initials on a tree trunk, except these initials would last a lot longer. Dendrology, way overrated. With the operative point of our discussion being that those above symbols very, very closely resemble the very first letter of our operative byline. Yes, those above symbols are an illustration of insemination, that wonderful act that precedes our most befitting begetting. A beautiful illustration of an I and O crasis, which is to say, a balanced contraction of two proper vowels, a melding or merging together as one. A symbiotic interaction of vowels yielding a phonetic sounding yo, yielding what is called a matrilection in the linguistic world, which is to say, yielding a very early Y to begin our begetting word. Once again, an illustrative act preceding our wonderful begetting, followed by that oversized limad figure in our parallel biblical verse. An oversized figure that is outstanding in our very word, which means to bear or to bring forth. See how outstanding it is in our modern Hebrew. A word and meaning that hasn't changed the least little bit for millennia. A bringing forth that continues to be known as Yalad in our modern day Hebrew. A supposedly common Semitic word. A word common to that geographic Levant. However, this is a strictly Hebrew word, folks. Don't let Wiki kid you on that. This is not a long-last Arabic word, let alone a long-lost Phoenician or Canaanite word. Let's just briefly examine that supposed Arabic commonality, shall we? Since we have at least some solid lexicon to go by there. A bringing forth that plausibly has the semantic range of matraka, nuyib, and ulado. With the modern day ulado being our closest spelling of that broad semantic range. Being closest to our Hebrew yalad, even if that modern day walad, ulado, looks radically different and sounds radically different, and has a different meaning, and has a different orthography, with the less modern Arabic figures having a far greater semblance to our operative inscription, since they are not your modern cursive, but rather block figures, posted on that very same media. So, they are begged, borrowed, and stolen block figures, as you're about to see. Which is to say, those ancient Hebrew letters of ours don't correspond to ancient Arab epigraphy nearly as closely as you might think. They are separated by many, many centuries. Let's look at your Arabic A, for instance. Okay. Hardly looks like an elf, does it now? Hardly. You see any profound similarities there at all in this chart? No way. Nothing on our Oceania chart whatsoever. Whereas we appear to have a vertical stroke on either side of these bent knee pictographs of ours. A vertical stroke that is a reasonable cognate of our previously presumed Phoenician A. This is not some sketchy word divider, folks. More likely just a short ah, as we hear in our Yalad word. How is that for an aha moment for you? Except we have A's bookending that lamad here. Yalad. Okay, what about the ancient W of that speculative ledo then? Well, the Arabic W stroke just so happens to be inside of the circle as opposed to the Y stroke of our Hebrew inscription being outside of the circle. And that's a significant distinction, folks, more significant than you might think. The very big difference between in and out. Just ask any pregnant mother if she knows the difference. So no, not an Arabic W either. But still to that remote Arabic plausibility, the Arabic Y does resemble our inscription somewhat. But that is just proving our point now, isn't it? Proving our point that this was originally a Yilad rather than a Ulato. Okay. What about the ancient L of that speculative Lato then? What about the L? Well, granted, the ancient Arabic L does look awfully similar to our ancient Hebrew Lamad, which is to say, the Arabic L to our right does indeed appear to be a blatant borrowing of the Hebrew L to our left. However, the operative L of our billboard appears to be much, much earlier, much more ancient, since it is much more linear, easier to draw on rocks. An oversized L that our modern Hebrew appears to have retained despite its cumbersome size, despite being overbearing. Finally, as regard the ancient D of Ulato, well, the D of the Paleo-Hebrew also has a strong resemblance to the Arabic D. That is, depending on which D you're actually comparing it to, which linguistic family you are comparing it to, and which vowel that D is actually associated with. But the figure that really strikes my interest is the one in the category of the W, that dadinetic W from our leading edge chart shown above, from our Oceania chart. A striking figure that looks like a slice of pizza, or looks like an ultrasound. Now there is the proper delta for you. There is a Hebrew dalet that we can all agree on. But that's just me creating a straw man argument in order to burn it down, since we already have a W to begin this Arabic word, a W that is radically different. Not only that, but apart from the unorthodox orthology, the meaning of those words are different as well. Different, since the Arabic semantic range of Lado leans more towards a past passive sonship than to a present active motherhood. Yeah, find those definitions there. Whereas motherhood is our immediate Hebrew context, a very active one at that. And that feminine context is really, really hard to refute here. So that Arabic generational difference would turn this inscription on its head. When our focus is probably from a female perspective, from a woman-centric perspective, from a woman on top perspective, to be overly candid. Just look at that earlier pornography again and compare it with our first letter if you have to. You get the picture yet? This is a woman-centric pictographic and not a child-centric pictograph. This just so happens to be a womb on top and not a child underneath. But even leaving that awkward word alone, does the Arabic want to claim the divine name in the title as well? Claim the name Yahweh as being Arabic? Didn't think so. Rolston wouldn't accept that Arabic claim either. And neither would you lie. So you're all in your own there. So, a bringing forth that was presumably represented as looking like this in the ancient Hebrew. Yes, represented that way back in the Paleo Age of Hebrew, presumably. With that inverted delta following an amputated lamad figure, a figure that fails to capture the bent intent, that fails to capture the live event. However, that above representation was just a speculative construct of Bronze Age Hebrew. It was just a weak evidence-based speculation based on an extrapolation of Strong's modern Hebrew, based on a few presumptions. You see, our positively Paleo-Hebrew word, yes, has never actually been discovered in the Paleo field. That is, not until now. What? Yes, we now have that complete word. Complete with that elusive dalet. Better yet, we have the original dalet completing that historical yalad. Even better, we have the pictographic dalet in the very byline of this billboard. The pictographic dalet bookended by that pictographic yad, with a vertical stroke going in the first figure and coming out the final figure, with a wee bit of labor in between. Not to belabor this touchy topic, but a perfect pregnancy progression. When you say the most perfect inscription. Now, you really want a mom tattoo? Well then, the above is the one for you. But for your supplementary consideration, here's our very helpful Douglas Petrovich again, with a helpful chart for some side-by-side comparison of that historical dalet. Note the dalet development through the ages from such a paucity of a vorlage, which is to say from a uber sparse sort of database. There are supposed dalets of the New Kingdom age, along with dalets of the Iron Age. Now, once again, here's our present billboard dalet for your quick comparison. See the similarity? Yes. A figure not too far removed from our old Greek delta, but much more so a figure not too far removed from the unanimous dalet of our ancient Gezer calendar, which is to say a dalet that all Hebrew scholars agree on. Imagine that. Unanimous agreement. A dalet far more ancient than you might think. Triangular, like the doorway of a pop-up tent, yet a pictograph of a doorway much more ancient than that. A doorway that men desire to enter, and women not so much. A figure that semi-resembles a pyramid, except for the rounded base, that is. Rounded base. Though the dalet or inscription has a bit of a nuance to it as well. It has a bit of a nuance as well. It has a vertical stroke breaching that barrier Not a breaching of Pharaoh's tomb, but rather a breaching of the womb. A coming out of the womb, a coming out right here and right now, just as those coming out inscriptions of our preamble demonstrated so very, very vividly. A vertical stroke indicating here. A verb indicating right here. An adverb, if you want to get hyper-technical about it. We have demonstrated that here translation in several other articles. Have demonstrated that immediate you are here context. Just not here. So now that you have been shown considerable evidence-based and data-driven proof, what are you going to do about it? What, huh? Well, if the above grammatical classification were the operative case, and I believe it is, then the syntax is typical. Then our top line, right along with our byline, would be following the typical object-subject-verb order of the day. I have demonstrated that early grammatical form elsewhere, a form that a certain Charles Gromolkov advocates for strongly, with the awkward grammar then yielding an echoing theme that Uber literally says, Yahweh begotten, child born here. With that here then being cataloged on our massive map, then being itemized on that birthing billboard, as in I gave birth here, with that vertical line indicating a general where. And there are an awful lot of wheres there inscribed over a very short period of time, with the very same theme and the very same meaning. An echoing theme that historically says, would you care to read that? No, not really. Care to read that? No, read it yourself. Take your time. In closing, either way you want to read the above, in the Hebrew or the awkward English, that Genesis verse is giving all the glory to Yahweh, is giving all the glory to him, whether you like it or not. Likewise, all those postpartum women who put their orthography on that billboard were giving all of the glory to Yahweh, whether they liked him or not. In that very same way, may you give that very same Yahweh all his well-deserved glory, whether you like him or not. Give him all the glory for your perplexing birth, as well as for your children's birth, since he is entirely worthy, and you are not. Cheers.